Hey friends, here's the uncomfortable truth about observerships. Most people waste them. Like, you would show up on time, shadow your attending physician, and at the end of 4 weeks, you say thank you, and you end up getting a generic letter of recommendation that says something like, oh, he was punctual, respectful, and that was pretty much it. In this video, I'm going to talk about like how, as an observer, there's one thing that you can do to get a strong personalized specific letter of recommendation, and that is presenting cases. Now that's true for all specialties, but this video would be geared towards psychiatry applicants. So I'm going to teach you how you can describe mental status exams of patients that you are seeing along with your attending physician. And that is kind of like mental status exam is a huge part of the case presentation. So if you could describe that really well for a patient, then your attending physician could write something about your MSc presenting skills in the letter that he would write for you. And it is one of the most fundamental skills that you need to know as a future psychiatrist. Alright, so what is the mental status exam? It's kind of similar to physical exam for other specialities, and it's a bit more than that. It's a shared language so that everyone is on the same page. Let's say if I were to see a patient and were to document in my MSc that the patient's affect was restricted to the range of dysphoria and non-reactive, any other person seeing the patient and my notes would immediately understand what I'm talking about. And since there aren't all that much imaging lab values in psychiatry, mental status exam is the most fundamental thing that you could know about your patient. So the mental status exam has got different components, and those components are appearance, behavior, motor activity, speech, mood, affect, thought process, thought content, followed by perceptions, cognition, insight, and judgment. There's a nice mnemonic that you can use to remember those. First, we're going to talk about the appearance. And in the appearance section, you would want to pay attention to the eye contact of the patient. So the eye contact could be decreased, normal, or increased. It's considered decreased if the patient on average makes the eye contact with the interviewer for less than half of the duration of the interview, and it is considered increased if they make eye contact for more than half of the duration of the interview. You do not need to keep the track of time exactly, like it's more of a ballpark figure thing. Another important thing under appearance that you would want to describe is the hygiene and grooming of the patient. Decreased eye contact is often seen in patients with depression or schizophrenia as a negative symptom, and increased eye contact could be seen in someone who is manic or someone who is angry, or like it could be a lot of things. Now that you have described their appearance, you would want to notice how they relate to the interviewer. For example, whether they are cooperative or not, or if the patient appears to be hesitant and is not sharing, you get the vibe that he is unwilling to share information with you, you would want to use the word that the patient's behavior towards the interviewer is guarded. And if the patient appears to be talking to himself, you would want to describe it as the patient appears to be responding to internal stimuli and is often distracted during the interview. Now that you have described their behavior towards the interviewer, you would want to pay attention to their motor activity. Now if you notice that the patient is very lethargic, tired, appear to be like speaking slowly, moving slowly, you see like as if he comes across as slowed down, you would want to use the word psychomotor retardation, which is sometimes seen in, again, depression and negative symptoms of schizophrenia. If the patient comes across as someone who is hyperactive, you would want to use the word psychomotor agitation. And if you notice tics or tremors, you would want to describe them under motor activity section as well. And if you find none of those, you could simply say that motor examination was unremarkable. At this point, I would want to make sure that in this video we're not going into a super detailed overview of the mental status exam. This video is made for someone who is totally new to mental status exam, is hearing it for the first time, so I would want to keep it a little brief. I'm going to put a link of the book that I used to study mental status exam, and you could use that book to study it yourself. After describing their motor activity, you would want to pay attention to what their speech is like. At this point, we are not paying attention to what they are speaking, but rather how they are speaking it. So in speech, you would want to describe the rate, rhythm, volume, and latency of speech. So rate is basically how fast or slow they are speaking. It's usually like normal rate. Unless a patient, let's say a patient is depressed, speaking very slowly, you would want to describe that the rate of their speech is slow. Rhythm is about the prosody or how musical is the speech. And here comes an important term that is called as monotonous, which is sometimes seen in patients with depression or schizophrenia. Their speech would be very monotonous and bland, like uh, it's as if you are talking to a robot and their speech isn't varying in prosody or music, or it doesn't has any rhythm to it. This is an example of a monotonous speech, right? Volume is about how loudly they are speaking. It's usually normal. Latency of speech is something that really impresses attendings when you describe it. Latency of speech is about how much time does the patient take in responding to your questions. For example, if it's a question that does not require a lot of problem solving and a normal person would respond to it quite soon, and if the patient is taking a relatively longer times, you would want to describe that the patient has increased speech latency as he began responding to our questions after taking a lot of time. Or contrast this with patients with mania who often interrupt interviewer and would begin responding to their questions even before they get finished. So in this case, you would want to describe their speech latency as decreased. After describing their speech, we would next move on to the mood of the patient, which is typically described in the patient's own words. The interviewer would usually ask the patient that, how are you feeling today? And the patient, let's say he says fine, so you would want to describe his mood as, like, you would want to say that the patient describes their mood as fine. Now notice that as an observer, you don't have to really do anything. Like, it is your attending or the resident who is asking these questions, and you are just paying attention and making a note of these mental status exam findings. And after the attending finishes talking to the patient, I want you to ask your attending if you could describe the mental status exam of the patient you just saw with him, and ask for feedback on corrections for your description. And after describing the patient's mood, you would want to pay attention to what you think their emotional state is like. A patient could be depressed, and when you ask after their mood, they could be like, oh, I'm feeling great, but they don't look like they're feeling great, right? So what your perception of their emotional state is like, that is described under affect. And there are a couple of clusters, like by clusters I mean categories, under which, like, examples of different affect lie. For example, one cluster is euthymic. So euthymic cluster basically means a calm affect, and there are various words inside euthymic that has the same meaning as euthymia, but you could use like that the patient's affect seems to be calm. Another cluster is euphoric, which is basically seen in patients with mania. Another cluster would be dysphoric, which is seen in patients with depression. Another cluster would be angry / irritable. Another cluster is fearful, apprehensive, anxious. The word anxious is often used to describe affect, so this is one of the more commonly used. So you would, like, if the patient seems anxious, you would say that the affect of the patient seems anxious for most of the part of the interview. Notice that affect can change over the course of an interview. So when you say affect seems anxious, like, it is highly unlikely that throughout the interview the affect was anxious. So affect is like only described affect is valid only for a particular instance. So always mention in your language that the patient's affect was calm for most part of the interview, but at some point his affect seemed anxious or whatever. So you would want to use that in your language. Like, affect is not one single thing, it changes every instant, right? And if you are hearing about mental status exam for the first time, I would want you to skip to the next component of the MSc, because right now I'm going to talk about affect in a bit more detail. So besides what we just described, these different clusters are called as type of affect, but there are other things that we need to describe under affect as well. Like, these other things are called parameters. One parameter was the type or the cluster that we discussed. Another parameter that needs to be described for affect is range of affect. Range means basically, as I mentioned, that affect changes from time to time. So range measures, like, range is about the variety of different affect a patient shows throughout the interview, and it is described using words like full range, and if the range is less than full, you would want to use the word restricted in range. So for example, a patient who was depressed and throughout the interview he just seemed depressed, so you would want to describe his affect as that the patient's affect seemed to be restricted to the range of dysphoria. Another parameter under which affect is described is mobility. Mobility is how easily the affect of the patient changes. I know it sounds similar to range, but it's different. Alright, so the words which we use to describe the mobility are like normal mobility or simply mobile, followed by labile. Labile mobility is when the patient's affect like very easily and rapidly changes. After labile there would be constricted or fixed. Note that constricted word is different from restricted. Restricted word is used for range, whereas constricted word is used for mobility. Now I'll give you a couple of examples where the range is restricted but the patient's mobility would be normal. For example, a patient who is depressed, like his affect of being depressed, like he sometimes seem a little less depressed, and when he's talking about more depressive part of his history, he seems to be like break apart and crying. So sometimes he's less depressed, sometimes he's more depressed. So you would want to say that his affect is still mobile, but it is restricted to one cluster of affect, that was dysphoria. Whereas another example for a patient who has a very labile mobility but the range is full. A full range means that the patient is able to express affect from different clusters, right? But their mobility could still be labile. For example, a patient with like let's say someone with borderline personality disorder, like at one point they are crying and after another point they start laughing. So that is called as labile. Their mobility of affect is very labile, but the range of the affect is full, right? So range and mobility are two different things. Another parameter for affect is whether the affect that we are seeing is congruent with the mood or not. This parameter is really important. For example, when a depressed patient, like the patient seems to be very depressed and he describes his mood as great, but you know that his mood doesn't look like it's great. So his affect is depressed, which is incongruent with the described mood. Whereas like if the patient said that he feels fine and he looks fine, so you would want to say his affect is congruent with his described mood. So congruency is an important parameter used in description of affect. After describing what we think of their emotional state, which is affect, we are next going to talk about thought process, which is how logical are the thoughts of the patients. So there are some descriptors used to describe abnormal thought process. Okay, so the normal thought process, like if you and I are talking and a person doesn't has a mental health disorder, they're like what they're talking about makes sense, it's logical. Like one sentence, you're able to get the logic and connection in between different sentences and their speech makes sense. So that kind of thought process is described as linear, goal oriented, like linear or goal oriented or organized. Like these three are some popular words used to describe normal thought process. Now moving on to some abnormal thought processes. Let's say I ask a patient what brings them to the clinic today, and the patient says, I'm from Kanpur, I live with my wife, and I came here today because I'd been feeling a little low for the past couple of days. So you see how the patient began answering my question with something irrelevant, but he gradually returned to answer my question. So that kind of thought process is described as a circumstantial thought process. Whereas if the same patient would never have answered my original question but kept talking about other things, that kind of thought process is labeled as tangential. For example, I ask him what brought him to the clinic today, and he'd be like, I live at home with my wife and we ate sandwiches today with some ketchup, and I love playing basketball with my friends. So he completely deviated off the topic. So that kind of thought process is tangential. The next abnormal thought process is loose associations, or also called as derailment. So loose associations or derailment is when the different sentences that a person is speaking does not connect together, like what he's speaking does not make sense and is illogical. For example, like you could look up examples of loose association through ChatGPT or Google search. An example, if I were to come up with like if I were to come up with an example on spot, I would say like let's say you ask a patient what brought them to the clinic today, and they'd be like, I live at home with my wife. My dog died yesterday. I scored a goal at soccer with my friends, and the weather seems really nice today. My leg hurts. Tomatoes are red. So you see, like the different sentences are incoherent. Like each sentence makes sense by itself, but like you can't really track the flow of thoughts. Like what kind of like what is it that they're really trying to say here. The next abnormal thought process is flight of ideas, which is typically seen in patients with mania, where they rapidly like change from one topic to another. Like flight of ideas is very similar to a tangential thought process, but the tangent is occurring at a very rapid speed. For example, I got my car washed yesterday and I played soccer with my friends. The tomato is red. My friend's been going to New York. And imagine the patient saying these same sentences at a very fast speed, and you are having difficulty tracking of their thoughts. So that kind of thought process is termed as flight of ideas. After making a note of their thought process, we are going to talk about what the content of their thought is. So this is described under thought content, and the most important descriptors that fall under thought content are suicidal ideation, homicidal ideation, and delusions. If a patient has ongoing suicidal thoughts, you would want to say their thought content shows suicidal ideation. Of course, you would want to ask like if they have a current plan or not, like if they have an active plan or not, whether their suicidal ideation is passive, active, things like that. Those fall under suicide risk assessment, and we're not going to talk about that in this video. Another abnormal thing that you'd want to make sure you cover under thought content is any ideation towards killing another person, that is homicidal ideation. Next would be delusions. Delusions are fixed false belief. For example, if a patient with schizophrenia believes that someone is their neighbor has installed cameras in their house, so this is an example of a delusion. To be more specific, delusions have got different varieties. The most common type of delusion is called as persecutory delusion, which is like having this belief that someone is trying to hurt them, harm them, track them, typically seen in patients with schizophrenia spectrum disorder. So you would want to remember persecutory delusion. Another type of delusion is delusions of grandeur, which are seen in patients with bipolar mania, active mania, where the patient believe like they might have superpowers or they are like very rich. Things like that are called as delusions of grandeur. What I like to do is whenever I mention delusion, I always want to use the word possible behind the delusion, because who knows, like there might be truth in it, so we're not really sure. So I would say something like their thought content is suggestive of possible persecutory delusions, as the patient believes that his neighbor has installed cameras in his house. So another thing that you just notice is that I do not end at the patient has persecutory delusion. I would also describe the thing that the patient mentioned that shows that they have persecutory delusion. You would always want to add context to your MSc findings. A less severe form of delusion is called as overvalued ideas. Now the difference is overvalued ideas are not that rigid. Like delusion is like pure, like his belief is fixed, like it's very difficult to change, but overvalued ideas are relatively less fixed. For example, a patient might have a preference for a particular brand of a medication, like he believes that a particular brand works better for him. He believes it strongly, but it can be challenged easily for him. So this is described as having overvalued ideas. Like the patient seems to have overvalued ideas about how a particular brand works better for him. Other examples of abnormal thought content are obsession. Obsession are unwanted thoughts, like a patient having repeatedly intrusive thoughts about getting dirt on their hands or wanting to wash their hands, and they do not want those thoughts in their mind. That is called as obsession. The gold thing to remember about obsession is that they are unwanted thoughts. Compare this with having preoccupation. Preoccupation, when I say that the patient is preoccupied with a thought, he is intentionally thinking about that thought. For example, the patient is preoccupied about I cannot think of an example, but you could chat GPT it. But the key distinction between preoccupation and obsession is that preoccupation are egosyntonic, that is the patient intentionally thinks about it, whereas obsession are ego dystonic, that is the patient does not want to have those thoughts but has them regardless. Moving on to the next component of MSE is perception. This is where you describe auditory hallucinations or like any other kind of hallucination. And if you ever get a chance for testing perception, always use this language. Like you do not ask a patient, do you hear things or do you see things? No, never make this mistake. Like, of course a patient would be hearing and seeing things like you and I do. The way you ask for perception is, sir, do you hear things that other people do not seem to hear, or do you ever see things that other people don't? This is the kind of language that you use for testing perception. The next component in MSE is called as cognition. Now, the way you test cognition is through, there are like tests that you like administer. Like example of a test would be Montreal Cognitive Assessment or something like that. I'm not going to talk about cognition. Like you could simply Google Montreal Cognitive Assessment or different tests that are used to assess the cognition. And during your observership, you would rarely see these tests being conducted, because like as long as the patient is able to recall their name or is aware of their surroundings, you could say that their cognition appears to be grossly intact. The next component of MSE is insight. Insight is basically, as the word suggests, like how aware is the patient about what's going on with him. If a patient denies that they have any mental illness when they in fact do, then that's called as having poor insight. Like an example of poor insight, a patient like undergoing psychotherapy sessions, like that's what therapy is about, to increase insight. And insight is closely related to judgment. Judgment is based on a patient's actions, and the way you test for judgment is like, let's say a patient like he comes in for a relapse of schizophrenia because he stopped taking his medications, and after describing what's going on, you would ask the patient, hey sir, what do you think we should do in this situation? And a sane person would be like, hey, I think I should like tell me my options, what all are there. And basically a patient who is willing to seek treatment if he is unable to carry out a functional life, that would describe as good judgment in this particular example. Whereas if a patient denies illness, is not willing to seek treatment even when he is significantly impaired and is unable to carry out normal daily day-to-day tasks, then like you would say that his insight is impaired, judgment poor. But you would always want to add context that why you are saying insight is poor or judgment is impaired. And insight and judgment are context dependent. In one context the patient can have good insight and judgment, and for another context he could have poor insight and judgment, right? So you would always want to describe the context that you are like using to describe insight and judgment. Alright, so at this point what we can do is like we can watch together a clip of a couple of abnormal patients, and I could then describe an example mental status exam of that patient, and you can try it as well.
From the mental health team today. Would I be able to check your name and date of birth, please? Sarah Thomas, 3rd of May, 68. Okay, great. So I've just been asked to come and speak to you because I've been told that you've been having some worries about your safety at home. Is that right? Yes. So how have you been feeling recently? Just really stressed, worried. Okay. And what is it that's been worrying you? I know they want to kill me. I know they want to. And I just can't be in that place. I can't be there because they want to get me. Okay. I don't know why, but they want to kill me. Okay. They're poisoning my food. I know they are. I know they are. Okay, who's that then? The imposters that have taken over the workers that look after me. Right. And how do you know that these imposters have taken over the workers? because they're trying to poison me. Okay. And how did you find that out? Sorry. No, that's okay. Is there anything else that's been worrying you from that point of view? I'm very worried because they do want to get me, and I do believe they want to kill me. Okay. And is there anything in particular that's made you feel this way? Because I know they're putting stuff in my food. Okay. Is there any reason that you think they might want to hurt you? I don't know. Are there any other potential explanations that you've thought for what might be going on? That is what's going on. Okay. They're out to get me. I don't know why. I've done nothing, but they're definitely out to get me. That sounds really scary. Very scared. Yeah, with all this going on, have you felt low or depressed at all? I just want help. Okay. Yeah. No, just worried. And with everything that's been going on, have you ever had any thoughts of wanting to harm yourself or not wanting to be here? No. And have you ever had any thoughts of maybe wanting to harm anyone else? Those imposters need stopping, but I would never harm them. They do need stopping, but I would never harm them. I would never do that to anyone, anyone, but they do need stopping. And if I tried to get them, tried to harm them to make them stop, I think it would make it worse. But I wouldn't do that anyway. I would never harm anyone. And do you ever feel like maybe some of your thoughts aren't your own? So sometimes people might feel like somebody's putting thoughts in their head or taking thoughts away from them. No, nothing like that. And sometimes people might say that they hear their thoughts being broadcast aloud and it feels like everyone in the room can hear their thoughts. Is that something that you've experienced? Yes. The imposters who are trying to poison me, who I know want to kill me, if they can hear my thoughts that I know that they're trying to do that, then they will definitely do it quicker. They'll know that I'm on to them. They'll do it quicker. Therefore, I need protecting. If they hear it, they'll put more poison in, they'll kill me quicker, I need protection. You seem a little bit distracted. Is there anything going on at the minute that's worrying you? So, I hear them talking. Okay, who is it that you hear talking? I don't know, but they talk. What do they talk about? Sarah. Look at Sarah, she's sitting on a chair. Sarah's nasty, she's evil, she's not a nice person. Look at her, just sitting there. She's really nasty, she's horrible, she's not a nice person. Look at her. Sounds awful, like they're saying some really nasty things. I imagine it must be really hard having to listen to that all the time. Do they say it about you, or is it like they're speaking directly to you? The person that speaks talks about me. Okay. I hear now. And do you know who it is that? No. Okay. And is it just the one person, or is it just one person? Okay. So you've mentioned about these kind of nasty voices that you've been hearing. Have you ever seen anything unusual that others might not have seen? No. No? Or maybe felt any strange sensations on your skin that you couldn't explain? No. And then sometimes people might feel as if the world around them isn't real? Is that something you've ever felt?
No.
Or sometimes people might also say they feel as though the world around them is real, but they themselves aren't real. Is that something you've ever experienced?
No.
Okay. And I just need to check a few things. So would you be able to tell me where we are right now?
Yeah, so right now, hospital.
Yeah, that's right. And do you know what day of the week it is and roughly what time it is?
Yeah, so it's about 8 o'clock. Monday.
Yeah, great. And then can you remember who I am?
I do. Are you're from the mental health team? You're doctor.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's
I do.
And what do you think is the cause of the problems that you've been experiencing recently?
I don't know why they want to kill me. I don't know why, but they do. I've done nothing. I don't know.
Okay. And sometimes when people come into hospital with problems like this, it can be related to a deterioration of their mental health. Is that something you've considered at all?
It isn't.
No? Okay. And what do you think we could do to help you?
I need the imposters taken away. The police need to come round. You need to give me a safe space. I cannot go back there. I need a safe space, and they need to be caught and put in prison. I need protection.
Okay. So would you be willing to come into hospital for us to try and help you?
If I don't want to stay at home, if that's a safe place, I will do.
Okay. And I just wanted to check, so if you were to go home, how would you manage to eat and drink if you're worried about them poisoning you?
I have all pre-packed food and drinks, packet drinks, all pre-packed. So I do eat. I will not eat their food.
Okay. And what if there was no other food around?
Well, I know that they are putting poison in the food and the drink. I know they are, but I think I've got that covered. But they have ways. They'll probably get into my pre-packed food. They will have ways. So they need to be taken, and I need protection. They need locking up.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for telling me all that. I know it must have been really...
Alright, so here we go. On appearance, the patient made eye contact for roughly half the duration of the interview, which is considered normal. She seems slightly unkempt and a bit disheveled, with her hair all over the place. Her behavior towards the interviewer was cooperative for most of the part of the interview. At some point, she seemed a little distracted and appeared to be responding to internal stimuli. Her motor activity was unremarkable. She did not have any involuntary movements. Her speech was normal in rate, rhythm, slightly low in volume, but I think that was almost normal, with normal speech latency. I forgot how she described her mood as, but I think she said that she felt fine. Her affect, on the other hand, was anxious for most of the part of the interview. At some time she felt afraid. She seemed fearful, apprehensive. And if you were to describe her affect in full detail, restricted to the range of anxious. Okay, I won't say the mobility as constricted, but I would say mildly constricted. At some time she seemed a bit more anxious, at other times she didn't seem all that anxious. And if she described her mood as fine, I would say her affect is incongruent to her described mood. Her thought content is suggestive of possible persecutory delusions, as she believes there are these people who are poisoning her food and are after her. She denies any suicidal or homicidal ideation. Her thought process is organized for most of the part of the interview. She does mention that she sometimes feels that other people are able to hear her thoughts. So her thought process shows thought broadcasting, And on testing for disturbances in perception, she reports hearing voices that other people do not seem to hear, which is suggestive of auditory hallucinations. And these voices make derogatory remarks about her. So notice that I'm also describing the content of her hallucination. Like her cognition seems to be grossly intact, and she appears to have partial insight into her illness, as she believes that she is mentally ill, but she's unable to explain that who are these people who are trying to poison her, and does not fully understand that her symptoms are due to her mental illness. And her judgment seems to be good, as she is willing to be admitted to an inpatient psychiatry ward. Alright, so that was it, and if you found this video helpful, hit the like button and let me know in the comment section what else you would want me to make videos about.